Proposed amendments to the Personal Data Protection Act are currently being debated in Parliament. The bill is expected to be passed later tonight.
The proposed amendments include increasing the maximum financial penalty to 10% of an organization's annual turnover in Singapore or $1 million, whichever is higher.
During public consultations, concerns were raised about the higher financial penalties. And I would like to assure members, as well as the broader community, that the PDPC will ensure that financial penalties imposed are proportionate to the severity of the data breach. The bill also provides for ministerial discretion to review the effective date for these penalties to commence. And we intend for the revised financial penalty cap to take effect no earlier than 1 year after the Act comes into force.
Tech editor Irene Tham joins us now to talk about these proposed changes to the PDPA. Irene, what do you make of the proposed stiffer fines? Do you think they'll be enough to spur or even scare companies to beef up cybersecurity?
Just a quick recap. When a company is found guilty of a data breach, under the proposed amendments, they can be fined up to 10% of its annual turnover in Singapore under it's still being debated in Parliament right now. The stiffer fine for companies brings Singapore's data protection law closer to the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation and is considered the gold standard. So for instance, GDPR fine on companies is up to 4% of their annual global turnover or 20 million euros for breach of rules. So Singapore, by upping our fine to 10% of Singapore turnover, it's much stiffer than the current maximum fine of $1 million. So a bigger stick is necessary because bigger firms, which have resources at their disposal, will and should sit up and should pay more attention to data protection and potential breaches. Some of them with operations in Europe or are already processing some personal data of European customers, they have already started following the stricter requirements under GDPR. So for them to comply with Singapore's law is just a natural extension of their strict following of the GDPR, compliance with GDPR. So, but however, some of the gold standards have not been implemented in Singapore yet. For instance, GDPR gives consumers the right to ask for their personal data to be erased. Even at this point, this right of erasure has not been proposed under the amendments, under the PDPA proposed amendments.
I see. Well, Irene, does it affect SMEs differently? What's in place to ensure that our data with these SMEs is secured?
Well, it's the same penalty, up to 10% of revenue or $1 million, whichever is higher. That said, I think I really think that the more you have, the more is expected of you. The raised ceiling will affect bigger companies more than they affect smaller companies. But SMEs with limited resources may not be able to hold up if the compliance cost for them goes up, especially during this current COVID pandemic. They do not get off the hook still, the fine still applies to them. But what is needed, I think, over the long term is for continuous education. SMEs have to look at what they collect and do not over-collect information. For example, if the last 4 digits of a consumer's NRIC numbers or mobile numbers are enough to identify them, say in a lucky draw or a membership enrollment, then there's no need to collect more information. But Minister Iswaran did assure the House in Parliament earlier today that the Commission will ensure that fines will be proportionate to the severity of the data breach.
Right. Irene, let's talk about the 2 breaches that were reported over the weekend, RedMart and Eatigo. These hacks come as a surprise given that these companies' businesses are primarily online and deal a lot with personal data. Wouldn't they already have some sort of cybersecurity measures in place?
Right. It is surprising and yet not surprising because on one hand, data is key to their business workflow. Yep. In the RedMart breach, we see that the passwords are already encrypted and credit card numbers were stored partially. So the partially stored numbers were stolen and the encrypted password was stolen. The fact that they were encrypted and partially stored makes it harder for the hacker to decrypt and organize the information. But it is still possible to to decrypt and to kind of do reverse engineering to get more information. And the biggest threat is actually phishing, where consumers are told, where hackers impersonate as somebody familiar to consumers, or to be pretend to be from reputable organizations, say Lazada or RateMart, and entice consumers to give more information, like leak their passwords, for example. So looking back at the RateMart breach, it seems like the leaked database is unsecured, and not securing your database is not good. And I think RateMart has no excuse not to do that. But if you look at the timeline of the data exposure, it could have coincided with RateMart's integration with Lazada, and someone could have overlooked this very important aspect.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Irene, for coming on the show. That was tech editor at the Straits Times, Irene Thum.